I want to bring him in. We are joined with Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. How you doing, Colonel? You doing okay this morning?
I'm cold.
It is cold here too. I have a heater, like right here in the back, that is trying to do God's work, but is not necessarily heating up the room.
10 degrees, 11 degrees doesn't come this early in December normally where I live.
Is it? It is, I think it's like 60 degrees, 65 degrees here. And I know I'm complaining about being cold in comparison, but keep in mind, I was in Malaysia and it was like 80 degrees, 90 degrees every day.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
after you've been in a warm climate for several months, dropping into the 30, 40 degrees less. Is a
Where
bit
were
much.
you, in Kuala Lumpur or where?
I was in Kuala Lumpur. I stayed in Kuala Lumpur for 3 months. And then I went to Jakarta and I was there for 2 months.
Wow.
And so, yeah, in Jakarta, I mean, it could be 11 o'clock at night and it's like 85 degrees.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great. It's
You're
great.
getting around ASEAN.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. As soon as I jump into Kathmandu, the temperature is like 30 degrees less. And it's like, Jesus, what happened? What happened? Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, he is former distinguished visiting professor for government and public policy at College of William and Mary in Virginia. He's also taught 6 years at the University Honors Program at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He is also, and probably best known, as retired United States Colonel and former Chief of Staff for Secretary of State Colin Powell. So I guess the first thing that I want to hit you on it is I'm very curious on your take on what is taking place with Hegseth. You are a military man, or at the very least you were a military man. You made it up to the rank of colonel. And what we're seeing is effectively the United States Navy murdering random people that it doesn't necessarily know in the Caribbean. And what's wild to me about this, as I pointed out, I sound like a broken record, but I'll say it again. The United States is trying to overthrow the government of Maduro. There's that. And on top of doing that, has decided on a murderous campaign of mass murder in the Caribbean as it's doing so. The media doesn't seem to take issue with that. What the media takes issue with is a double tap, that they hit a boat. The boat wasn't even traveling to America. That was one of the new revelations. 2 people hanging off the side of the boat, waving to try to get help. They wait over 40 minutes and then send another bomb in order to murder those 2 people in the boats. And the media says, well, wait a minute, that's impolite. That's a foul. Give me your take on this as somebody that was in the military. And like, this behavior seems to be way beyond the pale.
It's a war crime. There's no question in my mind it's a war crime. And I haven't even seen the video, but I trust those who've told me what's in the video, both military and otherwise. And this morning, it was summed up in a way that probably needs to get Americans' attention. Heather Cox Richardson starts off her article of yesterday, I think, with a description of what was said on 3 December, as I recall, in a press conference by the President of the United States when asked if he would let that video out. Of course I will. No problem there. And then 5 days later, he's asked by another reporter, you said you would let the video out about the 2 September killing. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. And he turned to somebody and said, get rid of that woman. She's a fake news woman or something. This is the President of the United States making a statement on one day that's directly contravened by himself later about this event. So that tells you something about, I think, even his grasp of the seriousness of this. This is a war crime, no question. The only questions are who was involved in it. And that's the debate that's taking place. Was the Secretary of Defense, the number 2 in the chain of command for the military underneath the Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump, guilty of giving the direction to go ahead, either by his slang or by a direct order? Or, as he has tried to depict, did he push that down to Admiral Bradley, and Admiral Bradley's the scapegoat here? Either way you look at it, though, one of those men is a creator of war crimes, and the top guy who authorized these war crimes, because this isn't the only one, every extracurricular killing on the high seas that's taken place, it's over 80 now, I'm told, is a war crime. This can be tracked right back to my president, George W. Bush. His turning to his adjutant general to to give him, which John Yoo and David Addington did produce, a definition of torture whereby he could then authorize human torture at the highest levels in the land, the presidency of the United States, is now being used to authorize so-called national security threat by narco-terrorists. What's the difference between George W. Bush and the global war on terror, and now this extrapolation into a global war, or at least the Caribbean and Pacific Ocean war on narco-terrorists? They're both preposterous constructs. At least Bush had the shadow behind him, if you will, of 3,000 or so Americans who just been killed. And he had a rage, as he said it in the Oval Office. I've got a rage. He even called some Christians in to assemble around the Oval Office table and convince him that his rage ought to be attenuated somewhat. He had a genuine reason to do what he did. Trump has no more reason than this, Jamal. If we don't get our hands on that 300 billion barrel reserve of Venezuela very quickly, the world is going to move swiftly to denominate in international oil sales in other than the dollar.
Right.
We need that oil to rebuttress our position in the Western Hemisphere with regard to that phenomenon. So that's what we're after there. This is war crimes in attempt to get oil, and nothing's new there.
Yeah. The other one I want to get to is Zelensky apparently meets with his European, I don't know, mean girl crew. And Zelensky comes back, has been reported in Washington Post, New York Times, Axios, etc., that Zelensky is saying, no deal. I am not accepting territorial concessions. I'm not accepting a deal. I'm not accepting anything, which is pretty astonishing considering what's happening on the battlefield currently, day by day. Give me your thoughts on this. I mean, is he going to be able to maintain this particular position going forward?
I think not. I think what we're going to see is the elimination of Zelensky, either by what we used to call the 13-cent solution, although now a bullet costs about $1, or some other method that we don't envision right now that might even be somewhat conducive to the shift of Ukraine from what it has been, which is a criminal state, into a less criminal state, and eventually maybe even into a liberal democracy. It is certainly not that. It hasn't been that. And all the rhetoric that we've put out there from Biden and Blinken and Sullivan and others, that Ukraine is this sort of, free state that's looking to defend itself. And this is not to discount from the bravery of some very courageous young Ukrainians who've been on the battlefield. But basically, it's a corrupt state. It's a criminal state. That's what I pronounced it. That's what Colin Powell pronounced it in 2002 and 2003 when we first started looking at it and trying to figure out how to deal with it. A criminal state. Incidentally, the only other state in the world at that time we couched as a criminal state was North Korea. So Zelensky's going, and he can take his choice. He can get in his Bugatti and try to drive out. He can get in an airplane, of which he has a plenty, and try to fly out to one of his billion-dollar dashes, or he's going to stay around. They're going to get rid of him one way or the other. Maybe even the Nazis might get rid of him because they're growing restless with his attitude too. Mm-hmm. Ukraine needs a new leader, and frankly, Putin and Sergei Lavrov are absolutely right that they cannot negotiate with a man who is unconstitutionally the head of the Ukrainian state. So they need to do it by roughly constitutional processes. They need to have a new election and a new president. He's staying at his peril. I will almost guarantee you that. And Donald Trump is not going to help him and has made that very clear. And the Europeans are angry about that and are trying to foil that. But I'm sorry, they have no money. They have no leadership. They have no wherewithal, defense or otherwise, to do that. So all they can do is play around in the mud. They can make problems, but all they're doing is playing around in the mud that they have created.
Well, there was a leaked conversation where behind the scenes they were like, they don't trust Donald Trump. They think Donald Trump is going to throw them under the bus. I find the conversation to be warped. I mean, over 1 million Ukrainians are dead. Like the entire premise of the coup that took place in 2014 was throwing Ukraine under the bus, considering all of this was foreseeable. I mean, what is their end game? I mean, certainly I don't have this belief that they can't see what's happening on the battlefield. I don't believe that for a moment. Their own publications, like the Telegraph, what is it? There's Ziegel or Der Zeit or whatever the name of the publication is in Germany. All of these publications, even in the United States, are reporting the number of desertions, the budget deficit. The ECB just recently came out saying you're not going to take the Russian money. Belgium is not going to give up the Russian money. Like, so, you have a budget deficit. You have a corruption case that has been just roiling Ukraine at this point. The lights are out in Kiev for like 15 hours because of the attacks that have been taking place by the Russians. I think there was like 1,000 drone missile strikes, if not yesterday, the day before yesterday. Ukraine can do nothing about any of this. They're losing territory faster. The Europeans have to see this. What is their end game? Like, what are they seeing that, let's say, the Trump administration, when Trump is like, I want to bring this to a close. What's the difference in these things?
Well, we have we military individuals with whom I discuss these things sometimes, we have a short description of what's happening right now. It is that the United States is giving weapons that it does not have to the Europeans for money they do not have, who will give them to the Ukrainians for soldiers they do not have. That's how farcical this entire affair is. And to get back to the Europeans in a very significant way, I think, you look at Starmer, you look at Merz, you look at Macron, and you see, as I've said before, dead men walking. They do not represent their people. Increasingly, day by day, that is becoming even more poignant and more true. The Germans, the French, the British, at least in England, maybe I think in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland as well, do not believe that Starmer's on the right track, nor Merz, nor Macron. And I think that's going to spread to other people, as it has already spread to the Netherlands. You may have noticed they elected an entirely new leader. Yep. I think that's going to happen everywhere. You're going to have people that are either like Orban, for example, in Hungary, or you're going to have people who are somewhere in the middle, but know that their future, politically speaking, is in restoring, not destroying, the very robust social programs that these countries have had until they joined NATO. Because these were the programs that kept their people content, happy. The Danes are often called, for example, the happiest people in the world. They have free education, they have free health care, they have all manner of different kinds of things that pertain to the really luxurious social programs they have that cannot be maintained if they go to these percentages of GDP for defense that their leaders now are claiming they're going to, particularly in Germany. Now, we could have a real problem here. We could have a reversion to a 1930s type Europe where everybody's squabbling and fighting with one another, in the midst of which the machine of Europe grows up again into a very powerful entity. I mean, Germany, of course, and becomes a threat. Or we could have a series of leaders who restore these programs, forget about this business of Russia being a major threat to them. It is no threat to them. Putin has said it dozens of times. If Russia is to become a threat to Europe as a whole, it will be because the Europeans forced him to do it. Let me say that again. The only way Russia is going to become an existential threat to Europe as a whole is if Europe forces him to become that. He as much as said that over and over again in English and in Russian. I do not want a war with NATO. I do not want a war with Europe, but I'm prepared. When you get in that position, and he's in that position to a certain extent now by these leaders who are hanging on and making the remarks they're making and doing what they're doing and keeping Donald Trump from shutting this whole thing down. That's what they're trying to do. He's getting into that position with them. And this could take off and be, as we had said all along, a much wider war, first a regional war. And then the question becomes, what does the United States do? You know, if there is a war that develops between the residual European members of NATO and Russia, what does the United States and Canada do? Do they rush in as members of NATO and enter that fray? I think not. So the Europeans need to think twice and thrice about what they're doing right now, because they're foreclosing their future.
But you know, the pressure that will be on America under that model would be astonishing. I mean, you would have Lindsey Graham, all of these members of Congress screaming at the top of their lungs, the blob screaming at the top of their lungs. Oh my God, we can't abandon. I mean, think of Ukraine, for example. Donald Trump gets in claiming he had every capability to walk. But because of this, let's say, perception that he would be given up to the Russians, that he would be abandoning Ukraine, et cetera, at least that's what the reporting points out, he doesn't do it. And so the Europeans know that they can go have a conversation with Zelensky because they don't believe that Trump will ultimately walk.
Oh, he will. And look at the strategy they just put out, both the defense strategy and the document that preceded that, which sort of discussed geopolitical, geostrategic issues in general. If you look at that strategy and you look at what Hegseth said about it, however imperfectly he said it, and coming from him, it automatically gains an imperfection because you're looking at the equivalent of a lieutenant telling you about the U.S. strategy. And what that strategy says, it's very carefully hidden if you don't parse it closely. What that strategy says is we are going to stay in the Western Hemisphere and establish a redoubt from which we can respond to China in a fashion that will defeat them. That's what that strategy says. It doesn't say that we're taking on a new color and tint and tone to the way we have practiced our imperial wants since 1945. What it says is we're readjusting those wants to the point where we recognize the number one enemy is China. We recognize they're beating the hell out of us in every category of competition right now, peaceful and warlike. We realize if we went to war with them right now, we would be roundly defeated. So we're coming home, husbanding our strength, building up our wherewithal in our own hemisphere so that we then can launch out and defeat China. Meanwhile, we will stay in the South China Sea, now the busiest commercial part of the oceans of the world in the world. And we will still do our freedom of navigation exercises. And we will also keep the Japanese and the Filipinos and the Australians and anybody else that wants to join in the fray, including Korea and Japan, of course. And we will whoop ass on China when it comes time. That's what that strategy says. And you think Lindsey Graham and some of these other idiots in the Congress are going to object to that when they begin to understand it? They're getting ready to pass $1 trillion plus defense budget. And they're creating $2 trillion in interest payments on our national debt within three to 5 years. So we're looking at disaster all across the horizon, and we're designing a strategy to deal with it, supposedly. I want to see it. I want to see how it happens. I'll probably be dead, but this is no strategy to deal with the problems that are in the world right now. And as I said before, we're looking for that $300 billion or 300 billion barrel reserve in Venezuela, so we can stand off the very successful to this point attempt by the BRICS, but led by China and Russia and India pitching in too, to reestablish the oil markets in the world so that they're not denominated, sales are not denominated in the dollar. That will be a Rubicon for the United States of America. After that, we will have real problems managing an economic downturn of gigantic proportions.
I am glad you mentioned the national security strategy, because a lot of people are describing this as the U.S. re-entrenching, that the U.S. is withdrawing from the world, that the U.S. Has capitulated to Russia and China. I don't get the sense by the way you described it. That's the way you read that document.
Just a reorientation of what was the strategy before, but very imperfectly executed. And one waits to see if this will be more perfectly executed. I doubt it very seriously, certainly not under Hegseth. I mean, it's like, Jamal, it's like we put a special operator lieutenant in charge of the largest not-for-profit organization on the face of the earth. Uses more oil, for example, than Portugal. This is a conglomerate of massive proportions with $1 trillion plus annually now. and it's being run by a lieutenant.
TV host.
That's the truth. That's the truth. Staring us in the face every day.
But even if it wasn't a lieutenant.
Oh, well, he made it to captain, I think.
Well, okay. Well, even if it wasn't a captain.
Yeah.
Like what does this, let's say, national security strategy give you in regards to, let's say, the Trump doctrine? Let's say this is not the Wolfowitz doctrine. Let's call it the Trump doctrine. How do you view it? I mean, you've already kind of pointed out the point of view of China. What about Russia? What about the Middle East? How does it view these other sectors of the globe?
These other theaters will be still active, but they will be theaters that we will, and here I come back to my formulation about Israel, that we hope Israel will be able to handle, for example, in the Levant and Southwest Asia, to include Iran. And in other places, we hope other things will tie up other potential enemies. But let me add, I don't think Donald Trump, and I think he's right about this, I don't think he thinks Russia is an enemy. I think he believes, and I agree with him on this to an extent, that Russia, once energized to have good relations with America again, will be a very productive partner in those relations. And that in the course of doing that, they can at least ensure Russian neutrality, if not actual help, once we eventually take on China. So they've changed that portion of the strategy of Biden and Blinken and Sullivan. They were focused on beating Russia, then going after China. That is a change. We now are focused on China. And that is a proper geostrategic focus. And I'm not inviting war with China by saying that. I'm just recognizing reality. The country in the world that is beating us in almost every factor of national power, economic, political, you name it, military, defense industrial base, Navy, Army, you name it, is China. Now, Russia has become a true competitor in that fray, should it begin, because we've allowed them to battle harden. We've produced a situation in Ukraine that allowed them to have a battle-hardened military, probably one of the best in the world right now, with a equivalent defense industrial base. And oh, by the way, at the same time, GDP growth and a functioning sound economy despite oil sales and despite the war. So we have forced Russia into a realm where she can be pretty independent, really. And one of the things that we should be trying to do is to peel Russia away, at least into neutrality, from China, if we're serious about taking China on. And again, I don't necessarily mean war, but I mean competing on a very strong basis and maybe doing something about the inequivalency between us right now, because China's winning all across the board. China's winning. And if we want to change that, we've got to change our attitude. And this strategy purports to do that. What I'm worried about is what I see in this strategy is more pork barrel, like the Golden Dome, for example, like the buildup of the Navy, the beautiful Navy that Trump's going to build and so forth. What I see there is pork barrel politics, because nothing is being done to rein in these defense contractors who will salivate at the prospects for the Golden Dome and the Golden Fleet and everything else Trump wants to do, but they won't build it, or they'll build it badly.
Yeah,
that's not what China does. China builds well. So if you're going to build a Navy to compete with China's, if you're going to build anything militarily to compete with China, not to even mention the economy, you've got to change the whole way you're building things. You're building sorry weapons at maximum costs and overruns and time delays, as Hegseth has recognized, that simply won't compete with China. China can build one ship a month. We can't build one a year.
Yeah, I get the sense that China's strategy boiled down to time. We need time. effectively, we need to be able to outbuild, out industrial capacity, et cetera, the United States. And at a certain point, our military will be to the point where the U.S. would back off. And this document, on some level, is the culmination of that, at least temporarily, backing off, with the United States recognizing that this is not the time to take China on directly.
That's
At least I
sort
could
of,
be wrong.
yeah, that's sort of a message in the strategy, though it's not apparent that they understand that might be quite an interregnum. It ain't going to happen tomorrow. It ain't going to happen on Trump's administration either. What worries me about it is it seems to me it's a fait accompli to them. And here I could quote John Mearsheimer. I mean, John Mearsheimer would probably agree with him. And I like John. He's normally right. But I don't think war with China is inevitable. This seems to say it is. And it seems to say, we know it is. We need a little time to rearm and refit and rest up, and then we'll have it. And my projection there is the only way you're going to have it is you're going to have a nuclear war, because you're going to lose in the opening stages, and those losses will be so traumatic for the American people. Think about, for example, 4 aircraft carriers in 30 days on the bottom of the ocean. That's about 20,000 people dead or in the water drowning. That's the kind of trauma we're going to have when the conventional phase of this conflict starts. Can we stand that? No, we will go to nuclear weapons. And that's what the evolution of any kind of war like this, no matter how much, as John says, it is going to happen, is that we go to nuclear war. And I don't think that's a good thing for anyone.
Well, this is Thucydides' gap, basically.
Yeah.
A rising power taking on an established power, and these two inevitably go into conflict. Hopefully, the hope is that this just remains economic. From your mouth to God's ears. Yeah.
Yeah, we hope it remains philosophic and not real.
Yeah. Because I don't know how this doesn't become a nuclear war. And I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's like people who are making these arguments that we can win a nuclear war.
There are.
That is mental.
There are. And the more we allow the scientists at places like Los Alamos and Jet Propulsion Laboratory and a host of other labs where they're working on these things. These scientists are young people, basically. I'd say in the 40 to 50 range. They're not from the Manhattan Project. They don't, other than reading about it, they have no experience with the Manhattan Project or actual hands-on the systems that were developed. They are the kind of people that we lust after in industry. They are making every day revolutionary steps with regard to nuclear weapons. They are designing new nuclear weapons. And what's happening on the other side of that equation, if you will, in the Pentagon, amongst the general and flag officers in general, is you have people who are developing this attitude along with these youngsters in the labs, developing the weapon systems and the technology to make them even better and better. You have these people merging in the idea that you could win a nuclear war. We've never had a real strong body of people. We've had people on both sides, civilian and military, who thought that these were just bigger weapons, bigger cap guns, if you will, and that you could use them. I'm hearing today, and I'm listening to too often, this idea that if we keep going on the technological road we're on right now, we're going to be at a point in the future where we could launch a first strike, then ride out whatever's residual in the country we launch it against, probably China and Russia, and survive. I think that's nonsense, but I may be wrong. Technology has surprised me a number of times in my 80 years on this earth. Maybe these people are developing something, but then you got to ask yourself the moral, the ethical question. Would you want to do that even if you had the capacity to launch a first strike, ride out whatever was left in the country you launched it against, or countries, plural, and then afterwards live with yourself? I mean, that's a huge question. But look at what we're doing right now. We're killing over 80 people without any due process, any law on the high seas, just killing them because we can. So doesn't that extrapolate into the thought in the future that we could launch a first strike and get away with it? and live with it afterward?
Last question on this one. Is it possible for a U.S. president to accept a deal from the Russians in this way? I don't get the sense that it is. I mean, like, whatever Donald Trump wants, I get the sense that Trump wants a deal, but he wants a deal in American terms. Russia is never going to accept a deal in American terms, which seems like the war just continues.
What are American terms, though, now? Tell me what American terms are right now. The terms are essentially Zelensky gone, Ukraine not fighting anymore, bombs not dropping, drones not flying, nuclear plants not being struck on either side, and a rump Ukraine that probably is going to be missing Odessa if we wait another month or two, and will not have a commercial port and access to the Black Sea. I don't see anything other than that happening, and Trump is rid of it. He's through with it. He doesn't want any more of it, and I don't blame him.
Well, security guarantees are fail. This idea that they're going to steal Russian money and use that Russian money in order to enrich Trump, that's going to be a fail. I mean, there are a few elements of this plan that are just non-starters.
And the Europeans are going to throw every monkey wrench they can in it. But I think they're not long for this world. The leaders that are doing it right now are not long for this world. And then the confusion after the new leaders come in is going to be real turmoil, and the future of Europe is going to be at least initially decided there. And I'm very, very, very concerned about how those decisions are made, because I think chaos is more likely the future for Europe than unity.
Well, the Russians are expecting a war. I mean, they seem to be gearing up for a war in Europe.
I think that goes away pretty much, though, the moment some sort of cessation of hostilities in Ukraine occurs, and it's clear the United States is not going to back Europe in any effort at all.
Okay.
And I think that's Trump's intent, ultimately. I think even more importantly, it's the billionaires in the shadows behind him intent.
Like Kirill Dmitriev.
The deep state, we call it all the time. Yeah.
So you think there's going to be a negotiated settlement ultimately to end this?
I do. And I think the negotiated settlement is going to be between the United States and Moscow. I don't think there are going to be Europeans in there except kicking and screaming.
Interesting. We will see. We will see. I am very maybe I've gotten jaded in watching all of this. But
easy to get that way.
Yeah, I just have a hard time seeing a U.S. president, especially Trump, accepting terms that the Russians are effectively going to lay down.
It won't be billed that way. You can rest assured of that. Just like Heather Cox Richardson, as I was saying, pointed out this morning, on the 3rd, he says A, and then on the 8th, he said, I didn't say A. That's Donald Trump. You better believe he'll shape this in his own image, as it were. It'll be a golden agreement.
Colonel, you have my appreciation for this breakdown. I swear to God, you do. Thank you for this. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. He is former distinguished visiting professor of the government and public policy at College of William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. He also taught 6 years at the University Honors Program at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He is also, and probably best known, as retired United States Army Colonel and former Chief of Staff for United States Secretary of State, Colin Powell. You have a good day, man. Thank you for this. Be safe, okay?
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
And happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you too. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shout out to Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. Always a great